In today's video, we're going to be going over the FV4030. So this vehicle is under the Agent Chopper. It is a defender. It has a few characteristics that kind of define that. It is a very slow vehicle compared to everything else in the game. It's not super sluggish in the fact that you're only going like 12 or 13 kilometers an hour forward, but you can definitely feel the acceleration being low compared to every other vehicle in the game. It does definitely feel like a pretty beefy vehicle to drive. It's not super easy to crit this vehicle from the front when you're playing against it. Overall, I think it's a pretty decent vehicle. It can dish out a lot of damage, or it can dish out consistent damage, and it all kind of depends on how you go with your build on this vehicle. First off, let's just talk about the Agent itself. For the Agent, the ultimate is the Creeping Barrage. So this is an ultimate where you put down an area that you're going to mark for a artillery barrage to damage all vehicles within it. It has multiple zones that activate after the previous zone has completed its barrage, and it does completely cover an area for about 30 to 40 seconds. The passive or trait on the vehicle is that whenever you do go onto an objective, such as a capture point in Conquest, Hardpoint, or Control, you are able to get warded, one stack of warded on this vehicle, which means that you do take less damage when you are on those capture positions. Let's talk about the actual vehicle-specific abilities as well. The jamming field. This is a large spherical radius around the vehicle that essentially jams the enemies. It prevents the vehicles from using any of their normal abilities, but it doesn't stop them from using their ultimate. It also doesn't stop them from using recovery protocol to clear the jam status effect. However, if they do clear it while you have the jamming field up, you will just reapply it. While this is applied, they cannot use any healing. Now, I will say this ability is quite expensive, and it is per second based, so it can be turned on and off quite rapidly. I will say turning it off does take a little bit more time than I wish it did. Now let's go over the second ability, the Bastion. So this is a shield that you place in front of your vehicle, and it acts as hard cover. It helps protect the very weak lower plate on this vehicle, and does kind of give you a hold down situation in order to fight enemies in front of you or even block shots to the side. It is a very useful tool in that aspect. However, one thing should be mentioned comparing it to the M1 is you are now a stationary vehicle when you use the Bastion, as you are going to use it as your hard cover, and you're generally not able to, you can push it around. Now, let's go over the equipment that I use for this vehicle. So early on, I did use the rebuild kit for my heal. However, once I did get the healing Bastion, I did swap over to the repair kit. So the repair kit gives 550 instant HP, and because the heal Bastion gives a constant 40 hit points per second, this means that I'm able to kind of keep myself alive for a lot longer by using the repair kit over the rebuild kit. For the second equipment slot, I use the recovery protocol. However, if you like using TEPs, you can. And I actually don't recommend using Phantom Curtain as an equipment slot on this vehicle due to one of the modules that I'll talk about later. I do believe Recovery Protocol is probably the best option here, unless you like to run failsafe circuit. For the modules, in the first module slot, I actually don't recommend any of the Bastion modules other than the final one, which is the one that gives the 40 hit points per second to all vehicles within 12 meter of the Bastion. None of these have enough quirks or differences in the actual Bastion ability that I would recommend using it over the 40 hit points per second heal on the Bastion. For the second module slot, there's only one option, jamming field energy cost reduction of 10%, and I would probably recommend this as an early pickup even if there were more modules, just because reducing the jamming field energy cost is really good, because it is a really expensive ability to keep running all the time. For the third module slot, this is kind of where things get a little bit interesting. So for early people, if you are struggling to make this vehicle work for you, I can recommend the reload time reduction. However, if you can endure, I would generally recommend the minus 8.7 second reload reduction over the 6.4%. And for the L7A2, or the second option in this mod slot, I actually don't recommend it at all. The AP penetration maximum increase doesn't really affect what you're penning. It's not any breakthrough limits, and the 8.4% increase on high explosive penetration, I don't think it's enough to warrant the module. For the last module in this slot, I can recommend this if you are going the high explosive build on this vehicle. So if you're opting out of going AP to have consistent high explosive damage, I actually do recommend this over the actual reload time module, as it increases your DPM by 16% compared to the 8% for the reload module. These other options won't matter too much for when you're running the high explosive module, just because you can't use any of these stats. However, when running AP, I don't think any of these stats are worthwhile compared to the reload, just due to the sense that you're not supposed to be fighting far range anyways. This fall-off distance increase and optimal range reduction isn't enough for me to warrant it over just having further reload reduction. For the fourth slot, this is also a slot where I can recommend an early purchase. If you are struggling with just doing consistent high explosive damage, you can run the first module for 160 tech. I generally still just don't recommend using your tech in these scenarios if you can persevere for a little bit longer, but if you do need just that little bit more for you to feel a little bit more comfortable in this vehicle, you can purchase this one. Don't purchase the high explosive radius though. I don't think it's worth it. Turret traverse speed. This is not a module I would recommend. You're already far enough away that you should just wait to purchase some of the later modules. If you are going to go high explosive only on this vehicle, I actually recommend taking the track repair penalty module for the increased minimum damage. So the lowest damage you can do when using high explosive will now become 86 damage, or essentially 87. It does increase the incoming crit modifier on the ammo rack by plus 6%. However, I don't find myself having too much of an issue with this vehicle when I do take that extra crit modifier. For the fifth option in this module slot, I just don't recommend this. This module is not worthwhile, especially in the current meta of the game. The fire resistance reduction is actually really bad for you. Getting set on fire even more in this vehicle that likes to sit in one spot is not that good for you. It's just the debuff on this is just too much. It does allow you to essentially do the jamming status effect on 2 shots of your main shell, but I just don't recommend this module. Same with the purple, the epic module. The high explosive penetration maximum, again, not enough increase on the high explosive penetration for me to really care too much. I guess with the other high explosive penetration, you can get 70 millimeters of penetration, which can give you some thresholds like the sides of the Leos. Overall, it's just too niche of a situation. I do like the high explosive velocity increase, just because it does mean that you're able to land shots a little bit easier, but the turret traverse speed reduction is kind of just a situation I didn't like to deal with. For the last firepower module slot, it swaps to your shell type to AP, and it activates the fast reload mechanic. So the fast reload mechanic is whenever you hit the sweet spot, you get a reduction of 40% on your reload, and if you hit the gray areas around the white sweet spot, you'll get a minus 25%, which means if you're consistently hitting the sweet spot, this reload reduction isn't really going to affect you all that much. Now, let's talk about this interesting AP internal modules hit statistic. So, what I believe the statistic is doing is when you are shooting into a vehicle like the T62AV, where it has 2 modules stacked on top of each other, the fuel tank and the ammo crit, I believe when you hit both modules, it takes the higher of the 2 module damage and applies it to your shell instead of just taking like the fuel tank or the ammo crit. It chooses the better option for damage, though I do have to do a little bit more testing to ensure this. The AP damage cone length, this also means that when you are shooting, like, say, a Leo from the side that's opposite of the ammo crit, you can still crit it through the whole vehicle, and same for the T62AV. This just allows for an easier time for critting deeper, like, modules and stuff like that. For the 5th module slot, the toughness module, I don't recommend any of the lower ones other than the hit points, just because generally hit points are pretty good to have. And if you're struggling just a little bit with this vehicle, hit points can be helpful. Don't get shock resistance at this point in the game. Doesn't really do anything, so I can't recommend it. Incoming crit modifier to the ammo rack of minus 6.5% and side turret armor. It's not enough to warrant using the 320 tech on this when you could just save up and spend 640 tech on either of the these two modules. The fourth module, this increases plus 10% hit points recovery from all sources. This means that when you are using the healing bastion, you are getting 44 hit points a second, and when you are using the 3 heal repair kit, instead of getting 550 hit points, you are getting 605 hit points per heal. And also, this module gives you a smoke area in front of your vehicle whenever you receive a critical hit. So if you receive an engine crit, or a fuel tank crit, or an ammo crit, your vehicle will shoot out smoke. This can be helpful, especially if you get set on fire at the same time as well. It also increases your hit points by 12.3%, and I don't think the spaced armor health reduction is too much to worry about, as it covers so little of this vehicle. And yeah, and because it covers just the engine of the vehicle, and that's not really where people are shooting all that often. So I don't really think this affects me too much, and I think it's a worthwhile trade-off. The last module in this lot, this can be a bit busted depending on how much damage you're kind of tanking. So first off, it increases the damage mitigated by the ERA up to 540 damage. This means any shell that does about 600 damage is completely mitigated by ERA. The whole traverse reduction, it is a bit much, minus 10% on a vehicle that turns extremely slowly to begin with. Does hurt you, especially if people are starting to wrap around you. But I think for the actual modifier, where all the damage you block or receive is converted into ultimate energy, is actually extremely powerful, especially with one of the agent skills that I'm going to be talking about in just a second. Let's talk about the agent skills for this vehicle. For this vehicle, I kind of run it in this order just because this is how I feel best for the FV, but let's talk about it. So for the first slot, I use the plus 10% to slow applied by shells, and this is simply because I can't put the tier 2 option into the slot 1, otherwise I'd probably run this. But plus 10% slow applied by shells means that when you use your ultimate also slows the enemies, and it will slow them just a little bit quicker when using this agent skill. For the second, I use the plus 1 ultimate energy for every 5 energy spent on abilities. So you kind of can quickly get your ultimate along with the one that increases your ult charge based off of damage received and blocks, and get your ultimate extremely fast on this vehicle. I actually kind of recommend this over the 5% reload reduction on the FV specifically, just because the jamming ability can never go on cooldown. It can only be on, off, or not have enough energy to be used. And the bastions, I don't know if they actually count towards the minus 5% reload until all of them have been used up, so you have to use all 3. But I'll just double check real quick, and I'll post the results on screen. Regardless, I don't think it's worthwhile to take it over this ultimate energy. For the third slot, I use the plus 10% to turret traverse speed. This just kind of assists me a little bit more when vehicles try to swing around me, and just makes it that much easier to defend my flanks. The plus 10% to engine power can also be useful for getting up to speed when you're at a standstill, or when you're moving from one base to another, and kind of just ensuring that you're able to maintain your mobility even in this slow vehicle. For the fourth slot, I run the plus 1 stack of warded when the enemy team is winning. This kind of just gives me a little bit of an edge to hopefully make a comeback when my team is losing. But another good one is Echo Shield. So whenever you drive onto a cap, you get the warded status effect, and for 10 seconds after you're off the cap, you continue to get the warded status effect, and this can be pretty useful, especially in situations where you're pushing into the enemy team, or you're pushed off a base by the enemy team. Alright, and we're going to go ahead and jump into a stock game, and if you do like the video and have been enjoying these videos, I do hope that you subscribe and leave a like. So, my thoughts on this vehicle. I thoroughly kind of actually enjoy this vehicle a lot. There's definitely nuances to it, in the sense that it's pretty strong and you can kind of play around your abilities, specifically your Bastion. I'm not a huge fan of the jamming field. It doesn't seem to really do all that much for me most of the time, though it is useful against vehicles like Raketa, where you're able to actually cancel out the rockets or cancel out the pyro trail mid pyro trail. I don't know if it should be doing that, and I don't know if it's also consistently doing that. It just kind of happens every now and again. A few things about like builds and stuff with this vehicle is I actually think there is quite a bit of diversity. So as you've seen in the module sections, there are 2 high explosive penetration modules. I actually personally don't recommend those for newer players, just due to the fact that due to the way high explosive just interacts in this game, it's a lot more difficult to use, and I consider it more like bait against new players, because you see, increase in high explosive penetration. Okay, so I'm going to be able to penetrate the sides of all vehicles and stuff like that, but in most situations, you're still just going to be penetrating the same areas. You're just going to have an easier time in penetrating it. Like this Martyr, I would still be able to penetrate the side of it quite easily. The big difference is I can penetrate the turret a lot easier, which gives me easier access to ammo racks and stuff like that. Overall, I don't think it's the worst build, but I actually think for high explosive, in general, most of the time you should be going like the track debuffs and stuff like that, or you're just going AP regardless. I am actually quite fond of this vehicle. It's definitely a fun vehicle to kind of just mess around with, and it is a bit enjoyable running the AP module because most people are so used to fighting FVs with high explosive that when you are using AP, it is definitely, you can tell it's throwing them off by how much damage you're doing. And even then, in certain situations, high explosive can do a lot of damage, like against the vehicles in this round. As you've seen so far, I've penetrated the Martyr, I've penetrated the T62, I've penetrated the AMX, so it's not impossible to get penetrations and stuff with the high explosive. It's just, that's not its main goal. But that doesn't mean it's never going to happen. And if you do prefer running high explosive and just want to augment that penetration, you're perfectly fine to do so. I'm not going to say you can't build the high explosive penetration, I just don't like it. Now, this vehicle, the Bastion, I think I would like to see a little bit more uniqueness in the Bastion modules. So, we have the healing Bastion, and I think that's the Bastion that most people are going to have when they fully upgrade this vehicle. But the thing with the healing Bastion is it's kind of a situation where you will pick it or you don't pick it, and generally you should pick it because it's the best option you have. It's in the state where I wish there was different Bastion types that had more nuance to them. You, of course, have the Traced Bastion, but my problem with that is you're not a scout. It's not a Bastion type that you should be going regardless, especially over the healing Bastion, but I could see an argument to be made, and here's a point on why I'm not a huge fan of, like, worrying about penning with high explosive. Yes, if I have the HE pen modules, but this is, stock gameplay, I would pen the rear of that M1E1, but the problem is, high explosive is still kind of just trolly, and will sometimes just not pen things that you feel like it should, and that's just an aspect of using high explosive, and something you should keep in mind. But let's go ahead and segue back to the Bastions. I wish there was like some options where you had a Bastion that reflected damage, or a Bastion that would throw out oil against your enemies. Like, you place it down and it puts an oil field area in front of it, but not like super far or anything like that. Now, I know the jamming, the modules for jamming don't have anything at this time, really, other than the cooldown. Or, not the cooldown, but the reduction in how much it costs. And I get that, and I hope that they have some very unique modules for jamming. To be honest, I don't really find myself using the ability all that much. It's just a bit too expensive for me to care too much about. And I can see it being useful, especially when you're making sure that people do die and aren't able to use like their 550 heal or anything like that. And in that experience, it is pretty good at making sure that you can secure those close-up low health kills, but overall, it's not something you're going to always think about. And my biggest gripe with the actual jamming ability is that the cancel for the jamming ability is a like 1 to 2 second hold instead of just an instant cancel. Now, we kind of get into AP on this vehicle, and this is just kind of what I would prefer to run solo. Now, if I was playing with a squad, or let's say this was competitive, I think I would actually be running HE, but I will say that AP definitely has a lot more of the solo carry potential than, you know, high explosive can. And that's just the nature of playing by yourself. Like, high explosive can't penetrate and crit an XM1V like that. But if I was playing with a squad and I hit him with high explosive, my team would be able to pick him off because he would be immobilized, right? It's just kind of those nuances of playstyle. But one thing I should mention is, like, you know, high explosive isn't the worst option either. Like, this FV over here is doofully, like, slowly peeking me off and stuff. And he does manage to get me, and that's just because, you know, high explosive will always do damage. There isn't a way for me to not take damage from him in that situation. It just, how much can I attempt to mitigate the damage coming in? Now, see, here's one example of me using jam to make sure that, like, he kind of dies, but I don't know, I don't remember if I picked up the kill or anything. I wish jamming sometimes had, like, more effects besides just vehicles. Like, I wish I could jam already placed abilities, kind of like mines and stuff, so that I could drive through it. But I get that that would be a bit too much. Now, one part where I will note where I think high explosive is just better in this vehicle is long range engagements. But to be fair, once you do have AP and everything, you shouldn't be doing that many long range engagements, just because you're wanting that up close fight to make full use of the AP. And the AP on this vehicle really does have a short range. I think it's super high drop off values. So once you actually start dropping off, it's just more economical to push into the enemy or just wait for the enemy to push into you. So like this, you know, this Bradley, before that ammo crit only hit for 700, but now he's a lot closer and it hit for 1200. And that's just how AP works in this game regardless. This vehicle is definitely a sit-in-place vehicle, and some people might not be a huge fan of that playstyle, but I think it's definitely a change in pace for how I normally play vehicles, as usually I'm driving like a banshee without my head straight into the enemy team, and I generally don't recommend doing that most of the time anyways. But there's also the example of the smoke curtains. It looks like someone hit me in the ammo rack and it automatically deployed the smoke curtains. Weirdly enough, I get hit by that barrage, and I wasn't even in it, but I guess I should have paid a little bit more attention that it could have done damage to me there, but that's my bad. But overall, and here's one of the nice things, if I was smarter, I would have just drove forward into my own smoke instead of trying to worry about wasting my repair on the smoke itself. But regardless, I do think this vehicle just soaks up so much damage. And when you have the healing bastion, like, in some situations, I feel like I have thousands more health than I probably rightfully should. So, you know, the 3 heals being 600 heals now instead of 550 heals essentially gives you 1800 health in that sense. And this is like instantaneous health instead of the slow build up health from the other healing modules or the healing equipment. But the Bastion always constantly giving you healing as well is a bonus perk in the sense that you don't have to worry too much about healing up when you're using the 3-part equipment, because that's one of the biggest issues with using the 3-part equipment is just the fact that healing up is going to take a lot longer just due to the fact that you only get 3 charges. But with the healing bastion, the healing equipment, it's actually pretty nice. And this is a great example of how good the armor on the FV is. So this guy is just having a difficulty penetrating me. He should be aiming for my driver's port, but I'm also wiggling to kind of help alleviate him aiming perfectly for it. I'm not entirely sure what he's aiming for. And then this is also why the Bastion is so useful and why you should generally be sitting behind your Bastion, is look at the lower plate on this FB. It's super easy to pen, and it's not like it's insignificant. It's very large area for me to penetrate easily, and that's something you got to keep in mind when you're moving positions, is just how weak your lower plate is on this vehicle. Overall, I did have a good time on this vehicle. I do think it's a pretty good defender. It has a lot of health. It can deal a lot of damage, even with high explosive. It has a little bit of variety in the shell types that it builds, which is, I always think, a good thing. I do kind of wish there was an earlier module for AP, maybe doing like 600 damage and 1000 crits instead of like the full AP module. But otherwise, I do think it was a solid vehicle overall and was very fun to play. Have a good one. Goodbye.